So what the company actually asked me to come in and talk to you guys about today is the evolution of gardening and where things can be going, what things to focus on in the store. Including issues they've asked me to talk about even, potentially next year, thanks to Justin Trudeau, the legalization of cannabis as well, and how that can impact the garden centers. So we are going to cover quite a few topics today. About a year ago, the company asked me to focus on urban gardening and determine, what are some things that we could do. And it's funny because we use the buzz of urban gardening, and really that does apply to a wide range of shop owners now in a lot of different locations. I found a quote from somebody, and I believe it was from Greenhouse Canada magazine, and he was an industry rep. And what he said was that the issue for garden centers is that there'll be fewer traditional clients buying fewer traditional products in the future. And how are we going to make that change? And that quote really stuck with me because that is one of the questions right now is, as the demographic changes, what are people going to be buying in the future? So we've changed quite a bit in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And 83% of us now live in metropolitan areas. The average lot size has actually gone down 200% in the last 20, 25 years. Like I said, there's that demographic shift in gardening clients. Come on in, you guys.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's informal. We're fine. So there's been that demographic shift. And while we've had that shift, there's been a lot of science that has come into the industry as well. I mean, some of it's quite well accepted now for things like mycorrhizal fungi. Premier Tech, obviously on the floor today, will be talking that up in a lot of their products. But when it comes to the science of gardening, a lot of it can be really interesting. And I do think that as independents, it is important to understand some of that new information so that you can get people really excited about the gardening opportunities. For me, a perfect example, and one that I like to do in a lot of talks, is the fact that growing up, I absolutely hated math. Math was not something I was very fond of. It turns out when you walk into, think about the most calming garden that you guys know. I mean, for me, it might be the traditional Chinese garden in downtown Vancouver. As soon as you walk in, you can feel almost the tension is just washed away. It actually turns out that that's a math equation that you're looking at. They're called fractals. It can be things like a snail shell or the way a tree branches. And when we see those equations, they actually calm us down. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about with science and the new thinking behind gardening is because I've never really thought about gardening as being math. Potentially, I would have never gotten into it if I'd known that. But so there's these things that are out there now and interesting information, and the way you can present it to clients can really help them get inspired. And I think that is one of the points as far as the future business is own the knowledge. You guys are so good as independents at understanding the plant material and everything that people should be choosing. I think it's another opportunity to own the information that drives the business. A lot of people, in, let's just say, mass merchant, big box, are not going to take the time to understand things. They're really just about getting people in and out. And you guys already know that that's not your core business. I mean, you do want people in and out, ringing the till. But understanding the information that's available is just exceptionally important for the future. While we've changed in the spaces that we have to garden in and like I said, that demographic move, our gardens have changed quite a bit as well. And one of the big changes that everyone is well aware of at this point is food. I think about 5 years ago, I don't think any of us really understood how quickly, it was going to accelerate the interest in growing your own food. And it's been a really exciting thing from coast to coast. And even I do a lot of traveling internationally as well. And I know in Europe and also in Australia, it's become a very, very big thing. The interesting thing is, though, is just as we've changed to smaller spaces, we're now all interested in growing food. So the average food garden now is about 10 feet by 10 feet. 47% of food gardeners now actually grow in containers. You guys are well aware of those sort of macro trends now at this point. I'm sure you're selling a lot of vegetable plugs in the garden center as well. I'm actually going to get to a couple points where I hope that we can actually start getting some value added beyond the plugs as well. The interesting thing for me is that millennials are actually the fastest growing group of food gardeners. This is really good news because, it's a new client base. As my parents get a little bit older, they're still buying in the garden center, but you do need that new business. And the millennials are really coming in with some interest. I mean, obviously there's the convenience factor for them as well, but they are there and they are willing to learn. And to be quite frank, when I say about that, owning that information, young people do like information. They maybe find it in different ways, but they do like understanding the reasons behind things. So it's a really good point to remember. One of my favorite quotes that I found recently was that urban gardening and food production in general is going to be an important part of any food-based system in the future. And that's actually a quote from the CIA in 2012. So even large-scale government organizations are understanding that this urban trend and the food production is something that in the future is going to be a big deal. When we think about it being a trendy topic and, maybe it's not going to be there in the future, there's now 800 million people that are growing food in cities around the world, and they actually make up about 15% of the overall food production, which is really, quite interesting. For me, a topic that I'm really passionate on when it comes to food, especially, is organic gardening. And I do think that organic gardening has been slow to, be taken on by the consumer. Everyone seems to be interested in a lot of organic other things, but organic gardening, for some reason, is that one thing that's a little bit sticky still. But I am noticing more that when I give talks that people are considering it. So when it comes to information, by all means, please stop by the booth if you have any questions about organic gardening. I'm not going to go into it too much right now. But the important thing that I could relate to you as retailers about organic gardening is to make sure that people feel comfortable with it. No one wants to get beat with a stick on any topic, and especially organic gardening. I mean, you really do want to have an inspired conversation with people. And that can be as easy as, just discussing some of the benefits of organic gardening. The fact that using organic fertilizers is almost like putting money in the bank. You're going to help the overall health of the soil. One thing to remember in the day and age we live in is that organic gardening, organics in general, improve resilience in gardens. Resilience in some years might not be that important, but in other years where you might have some drought or some extreme weather, and it is happening more frequently now, the organic garden wins every time. The organic farm wins every time because of that resilience. And some of these topics sometimes get a little dry when it comes to organics, but it's really just having that knowledge and being able to inspire the clients that I think is going to help business really grow over time. Another way that our food gardens are changing, and again it relates to the lack of space for some gardeners, is the fact that indoor gardening is becoming a legitimate force in the gardening world, specifically for food. In general, I mean, we've always had indoor tropical plants, and they're nice to have, good air filters for the rooms, but growing nutrition indoors is something that I've been doing for 20, 25 years now, but it is starting to catch on. We're gonna get into some other indoor gardening topics towards the end of the talk, but the one thing that I really try and emphasize to retailers, and I think that this is really important, especially in the East, you're basically dealing with a 12 to 16 week window for selling in garden centers. And then you have to move into seasonal goods that, maybe some Christmas or Halloween, and you're making money on the margins that way. Indoor gardening gives you guys a year-round activity. I always refer back to my parents, because for my parents, when I tried to introduce them to indoor gardening, they said, look, we're not growing cannabis, we don't need to grow indoors. And I mean, that's sort of that standard friction that you find. But when I got my parents started, and for me the easiest thing to start people with is T5s, trays of microgreens or lettuce, something that's quite a quick turnaround and gives them a visual and a small space opportunity. Now my parents garden on a multi-tiered system. They're starting to move into things like peppers and tomatoes in the wintertime as well. And they're going into garden centers and asking for, seeds or lights or whatever it might be in those times of the year when things are a little bit slow. And so, don't forget that your core business is gardening, and that there's a huge opportunity out there to actually expand, the gardening season. We have vendors in our show today that are well positioned to help you guys with different growing methods for indoor gardening. I'd invite you guys to go to the far end of the hall and see some of the hydroponic vendors that we have here. Very knowledgeable, and it's not something, it's easy to approach. You don't have to be, daunted by, I'm not sure if this is really gonna, is it too complicated? I mean, really all you're dealing with is soil and containers, which you guys know very well, and adding in a little bit of lighting and potentially some ventilation if you're into a bigger indoor growing situation. But for me, the idea of growing something yourself, and I should point out, I've grown everything from spinach to pineapples indoors. So I mean, you can have some fun as well. I don't really recommend the pineapple. It was the most expensive pineapple ever grown. I had no idea they only grow one, and it takes like 2.5 years. But it was the best pineapple I've ever eaten, if that's any comfort. There's so much opportunity, and I really think that all of us need to take advantage of that. And it really is that opportunity, again, to just seize the idea and own it as retailers. To give you guys a bit of a stat, because I always like to throw in a few stats just to help out. Google searches for terms related to indoor gardening in North America has actually increased 300% in the last year and a half. So you do have a lot of people that are looking for this information now. Also too, when it comes to the size of the market, I found a company in Europe that has actually quantified the size of the market, and they're looking at a market by 2020 that's going to be 3 billion euros. Okay, and a lot of that relates to the Scandinavian countries like Finland, Sweden, Norway. When you think about it, they're pretty similar to us in terms of climate and opportunity. So, remember that the Europeans, sometimes they get things right, sometimes they don't, but they are looking at this as a true, legitimate opportunity now to extend the season in garden centers and also provide satisfaction of growing your own food indoors. The last thing I want to cover, I should actually check how I'm doing on time here. I'm probably good anyway. Okay, so we got tons of time. So we'll open it up to questions too at the end, you guys. If you have something that I haven't talked about, we can always add that in. The company really wanted me to talk about legal cannabis and the potential change in your business model for next year. Justin Trudeau has made it very clear that there will be changes in Canadian law. The question for me that I want to help you guys with right now is, how could that affect your business? And what are the different models that could happen? Now, if we go with the strictly medical model that they have now, you're going to have very few large growers growing stuff for everyone. To be quite frank, as retailers, that's not exactly a good model. Unfortunately, no one on the retail side is lobbying the government right now, and so that is a distinct possibility. However, our government has also been reviewing what's happening in the United States right now. And the United States, I mean, I work down there a lot, and the changes that have happened in the United States in the last 5 years are honestly shocking. If you go to Colorado now, I mean, it's very different than it was 5 years ago, that's for sure. And so our government is looking at what's going right and what's going wrong down there. Now, if you look at a state like Colorado or Washington or Oregon, there are provisions for people to grow their own plants. Now, this is exciting because it opens up sort of that hobby brewing type aspect to the general consumer. And I don't want to mislead you guys on the cannabis opportunity that is coming if it goes that way. We're not talking about, large-scale producers that are going to be coming in and buying vast quantities of equipment from you. I think what we're talking about are, potentially people like my mom and dad. They'll be horrified that I just brought them up in this topic, but they're considering maybe, they want to grow a few plants at home. And that's where you guys are experts. Already you know so many of the things that are going to be required to help out that contingent of people. So we're talking about something maybe where you might want to look at tent-based systems, again, look at that lighting option that might be available to them. But it's going to be the small scale, maybe 4 or 5 plants that are going to be coming into your shops. And I do think that now is the time to gear up for that a little bit. because I do think it's coming. I do think that the Canadian government is going to make it so that the average consumer has an opportunity to grow a plant for themselves. And to be quite frank, for the gardening industry, it's a breath of fresh air. Whether you agree with what those people are doing or not, and I mean, that is up for debate still, it's coming, and it's going to be a whole new market. And that market is going to be something that can drive business again through that seasonal extension throughout the year. And so for me, it's actually an exciting time for us to potentially take advantage of that opportunity. So I think that, to be honest, it's pretty clear that we have, evolving garden sizes, a renewed focus on food. Gardening techniques, I didn't really talk about gardening techniques, and this is something where I think that you guys can really be champions. I've been doing talks about organic gardening for years, and now when I bring up something like hugelkultur, which I just like saying, people actually know what I'm talking about now. Not everyone, but I was in Austria for a trade show about a week and a half ago in Vienna. And I started talking about my own garden. I have a 3-acre garden, so mine is not 10 by 10. But I have a 3-acre garden where I'm developing a food forest. I have 35 types of fruit, 6 types of nuts. My garden center clients actually love me because I not only sell them stuff, but I buy a whole bunch as well. There's people now that are like, oh yeah, permaculture, I've heard of that. Or biointensive growing, I've heard of that. And so a lot of these techniques are starting to become a little bit more mainstream now. It doesn't mean that you've heard of all of them yet, but people are thinking about it. It's like when I first heard about mycorrhizal fungi, I was actually in a forestry class in the early 90s in university. And it was such an interesting topic. And when you start digging into these things, and now mycorrhizal fungi, thanks to Premier Tech in Canada, is pretty mainstream idea. But again, going back to the science, it's that that symbiotic relationship, understanding that the soil isn't just an anchor, that the biology is actually assisting the plant. And I will give you guys 2 examples of that to end my discussion, and try to inspire you guys with the information. Plants actually secrete up to 30% of the sugar energy that they produce into the soil. Now, you might think that's a little bit inefficient, but for the plant, they have a plan. So that basically carbohydrate or sugar energy goes to all the microorganisms around them in the soil. So good deal for the microorganisms. But you wonder, well, what's the tree getting back? Well, with something like a mycorrhizal fungi, it's going to get back the hygroscopic water. So during drought, it'll actually have more water available through that fungal network. They're also pulling out all the micronutrients as well out of the soil and make it easier for the tree to be healthy through, that development of a fungal network around their root structure. So there's these relationships that we're starting to understand now. But when we talk about mycorrhizae, if you hold a handful of good quality topsoil in your hand, you're holding about as many organisms as there are people on the planet. So we still have a lot to learn on this stuff. But again, that you guys are in a position to know this and own it. The one last anecdote that I'll give you guys, because I just love plants, and a lot of people I think don't really recognize how amazing they are. I don't know if you guys watch The Nature of Things, but if you can go into back issues, you can watch the show called Smarty Plants. It'll show you all sorts of amazing stuff with plants. But the one that really stuck with me, because I'm a West Coast kid, was the Douglas fir that they tested. And on the coast, the Douglas fir, what they did was they took radioactive, essentially carbon dioxide. They put a radioactive carbon molecule in a bag on, a branch structure on a tree. And then what they did was they followed the radioactivity in the root structure in the soil. And the carbohydrates that were produced in the tree with that radioactive carbon actually went directly to their seedlings on the forest floor. So in that case, you're actually looking at a tree, understanding where its own babies are, and it's actually trying to give them extra food. So, when we see plants, and I know as, botanical enthusiasts, we see the value as far as the aesthetic is concerned. But it's important to remember that there is an entire system, including the plants themselves, that have all these wonderful little aspects. And for me, I don't work in a retail garden center, but I can tell you guys for sure that when I blow up my front yard like I do in every house that I own and rip out the entire lawn and start doing, all this weird stuff, The other day at my new house, I had somebody, he actually stopped in the middle of the street with his car. He didn't even park it, and he just got out. And he's like, I don't understand what you're doing. I've been driving by for 2 weeks now. What is going on in your yard? Right? And that's what you want. You want people just having that energy and thinking, well, why can't I do something like that? And I think it's up to all of us as an industry to really inspire those people that are maybe on the margins. They might be buying a few, winter pansies or maybe some annuals for baskets. If you can inspire them, there's going to be extra sales that come in out of that. And I don't want to make it all an economic question, but for you guys as retailers, that is the important aspect, is how do we get more people involved in something that we all have passion about? And I think that really does boil down to, instilling the passion and the information in your team. I know with seasonal employees that can be difficult, but definitely your full-time employees, try to get them into a new idea. Maybe this year they try some organic gardening. Maybe this year they try some indoor gardening. Whatever it might be, there's opportunities for your team to really be, messengers of that change. And I think that really is the future, is going to be owning the information, and owning the topics that are pressing. And, things like food, indoor gardening for sure are two that I would really focus on.